That's positive. And now going to move on to buses. So I'm going to go to Assembly Member Garrett.
Morning. So back at our January meeting, we were looking at the measures being put in place to tackle the problem of slow bus speeds, which obviously is a problem for passengers and a problem for TfL and operators. When we looked at the detail of the plan, it seemed that the measures that TfL has announced are not going to be enough to close the gap and get the improvement that we need. What else is either the Mayor or TfL planning to improve bus speeds, or perhaps tackle the reduction in bus speeds? I mean, that would be a start.
We've got a comprehensive action plan as part of our business plan around the bus network more widely. You're right, bus speeds have declined over the last 3 years. What we have seen, because of actions that have been taken actually in recent times, is while speeds haven't yet started to increase, waiting times have improved, and the availability of buses has improved, and we've seen that notably over the last few months. There's a range of packages here that will take. Some will be quicker to deliver benefit and some will be longer. 3 or 4 examples. So one is lane rental, where we've finally got some approvals through from government for a number of boroughs to now have lane rental that we know will give greater control over utility works and roadworks, which are a significant cause. We're looking to improve more bus priority across London, work with the boroughs on that. You'll have seen the Better Bus Partnerships work that we're doing. So we've awarded funding to 4 boroughs on that scheme, and we're also working with the boroughs who are unsuccessful in getting the full amount to see what further work can be done on bus priorities. We're also looking at bus capacity in the network more widely, because we've seen some of the biggest decline and deterioration in central and inner London, where we clearly have highest volume of buses. How we match supply to demand better, which would also enable us to increase bus services in outer London. And then we've also launched what we call London on the Move, which is a programme of work around improving and reducing congestion around the London. A big element of that is new technology called Fusion that we're installing on our traffic light systems. Off the top of my head, about 2,000 sets of traffic lights have already got that technology. We've got over 6,000 sets of traffic lights to put that in place, and this is dynamic technology that can react to the needs and the traffic demands at the time, as well as be programmed to prioritise certain vehicle types or that sort of thing, depending on the location of the city, and is already attracting a lot of attention actually from cities elsewhere. So that combination of effects, we are confident will make a difference. We know journey time is a key consideration for customers who want to use the bus network. We need to make sure we can deliver a safe, reliable and regular service for them. So not seeing the progress yet on speed, but we are seeing progress on journey time.
So that long list, some of the Fusion stuff, for example, is quite technologically exciting. But I think that's the same list that we had in January, and I think our sense was not sure that that's going to deliver the improvement. I appreciate those things some of them a little way in the future, but there's nothing additional since then. Those are all the things that were there in January.
No, I mean that is our plan. I mean, clearly we'll work with the boroughs and others to see if there's other alternatives. We obviously work very closely with the bus operators on actual performance, so vehicle availability, driver availability, all those sorts of day-to-day operational issues. And of course, we do an awful lot of work, particularly around major events and also planned work. So, for example, dealing with the impact of the A40 closure at the minute, actually, the impact of that has been very well managed from a bus network, for example. So how we deal with those to try and reduce the impact when we have events of that nature.
Okay. You mentioned operators and drivers, actually, and one of the points that they both made to us was that reallocation of road space away from buses is a problem. Either cyclists in bus lanes, for example, the bus then effectively has to go at the speed of the slowest cyclist because it's obviously not safe, particularly in inner London where you've got large numbers of cyclists. There's just no possibility of safely overtaking. Road narrowing where you've got then a separate cycle lane, good news for cyclists, challenge for buses. Do you recognise that those concerns that were raised with us by drivers and operators, that's part of this problem of bus speed reduction?
So I'm sure in some parts of the city it's definitely had an impact, but of course there's been a really key element of improving our Vision Zero, of reducing the risk of cyclists being killed or seriously injured. As we know, a tragic number of people have over the years. So having segregated cycle lanes, there's a limit to how much space is available to do that. We've done that where we think that the volume and the risk is the greatest. We will always work with the operators if there are pinch points that we need to be looked at to see if there are changes that can be made. Some of those schemes are obviously TfL schemes, some of them are borough schemes, and we'll work with the boroughs where it's a local responsibility.
But the borough schemes are sort of agreed through TfL, though, aren't they? I mean, boroughs don't implement schemes that TfL don't sign off through the LIP funding process.
No, true. But what we need to do is then we still have to get their agreement if we think there are changes that need to be made on the back of lived experience.
The only reason I mention this is because I sometimes hear this, oh, well, that's a borough scheme, as if somehow, the Lambeth or whoever is doing this, maybe even against TfL's will. But that's obviously not true. If a borough has an idea, obviously it's almost always going to be funded by TfL because they haven't got the money for much more than a few bollards and a bit of paint. So anything more elaborate than that is funded by TfL, and who pays the piper calls the tune, and so it gets built in the way that TfL want, doesn't it, on those, in inverted commas,
so if it's a LIP funded scheme, obviously it has to be approved by us. But as you say, there are some schemes which the boroughs have put in themselves. But regardless of whether it's a 100% borough scheme or a TfL funded scheme, if we see there are operational issues as a result of the scheme, then we will look to make changes accordingly.
Okay. I mean, one example of that perhaps was the Streatham Wells scheme, where we saw when the Streatham Wells LTN came in, pushed a lot of traffic onto the A23 through Streatham, brought buses and everything else really to a standstill there. And as soon as the scheme was, I believe it's technically paused rather than removed, but anyway, it's gone, everything returned to normal. Would that be an example of a scheme where you've identified a problem and encouraged the borough to rethink what they're doing, or even told them to rethink what they're doing?
From memory, because it was a while back, absolutely we worked with the borough because it caused all sorts of issues. I don't think it was a TfL-funded scheme from memory, but we also knew that we were going to be coming along with a wider proposal around the wider A23 work, which is underway, which I think assured the borough around what we're doing from an improving safety and segregation perspective. So that was a
LIP scheme, wasn't it?
Sorry?
That was a LIP-funded scheme, wasn't it, though? The Streatham Wells?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't recall it being one, but if it was, then I'll take that back. But either way, there's an example of a scheme went in. It caused quite significant traffic and local issues, and it was agreed to take it out.
More broadly, I suppose two measures happening. So that's a specific example of an LTN. Do you recognise there's a trade-off generally with LTNs going in, particularly they're becoming more widespread? Obviously, the stated design intent of an LTN is to clear through traffic from side roads and therefore effectively put that traffic onto the through routes, which is obviously what the buses would be using. And so that puts more traffic in competition with the buses and creates a potential congestion problem. Is that a trade-off that you recognise in general with LTNs?
So I think when you make any change to the road network, we need to make sure we do a full assessment of the potential implications of it. I think.
But is that one of the potential implications, is what I'm asking?
Well, we would always check to see if it is, but I think we have to look at there's a very large number of LTNs that have been very successful and very beneficial to the city. We will always assess any change to any road network, whether it's a TfL scheme or somebody else's scheme, to see what we think the implications will be.
But in general, when you look at this overarching problem of how do we tackle bus speeds in London, are LTNs on the list of possible suspects in your mind, or not really?
It's not one that's deemed to be a significant cause of bus speed deterioration, no.
Okay. And what about 20-mile-an-hour limits? So we've seen, obviously, particularly in inner and central London, that's now quite widespread. In outer London, we're seeing, particularly on through roads, more so than on residential side roads. Obviously, it's those roads where the buses are and where you see a road reduced from 30 to 20. Is that, do you think, a contributor to lower bus speeds?
No, we've got no evidence that that's the case. In fact, we know that the journey time is hardly impacted at all when the speed limit's reduced, particularly when it's 30 to 20. And we know, of course, that the safety benefits are really very significant. It's not very often that a bus would be travelling at 30 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour area in the vast majority of London. So simply by the nature of how frequent the bus stops are. So that there's no evidence that I've seen that shows that the speed limit reduction has had any material impact on bus journey times.
Okay. Just finally, on a slightly different topic, but sticking with buses, obviously we've seen quite widespread adoption of electric buses now, about 40% of the overall fleet, I think, and in my constituency, the Sutton depot has been switched over, so we have, I suppose, a particular concentration of those. They have lots of positive benefits, quieter, less rattly, smoother, phone charging points, all that good stuff. Obviously, they are quite a bit heavier. Do you have any evidence that the extra axle weight of electric buses is contributing to additional road wear or additional potholes?
So as you say, we're actually getting close to 30% of buses in London now.
Apologies.
No, it's fine.
I'm getting ahead of where
No, I'd love to hit 40%, but we're very close to hitting 3,000 out of the 9,000, which is quite an achievement in the time frame. And as you say, they come with all those additional safety and customer benefits. Again, we keep a close eye on it. I'm not aware of there being any specific evidence to say that the buses are having a direct impact on road condition or road wear, but we'll keep a close eye on that. Yeah, because relative to the weight of the bus, it's insignificant. So compared to the buses they're replacing. So, but we'll keep a close eye on it. What we do obviously keep an eye on is where we've got bridges or infrastructure that are of a certain age. And we know, because we've not had the money to renew or replace them, we keep a close eye on whether or not overall weight of vehicles, including buses, needs to be considered in terms of any operating restrictions. We try and minimise that. But again, if there was an issue with a key piece of infrastructure and we had to put a weight restriction on, we would do that if we needed to. But there's no evidence that I'm aware of.
So it wouldn't. Sorry, I think I didn't quite catch. I think, Seb, did you say it's only a small additional weight? Is that what you're saying? Because I think it's like between 2 and 3.6 tons extra.
Relative to the weight of the bus. So the additional weight of an electric car versus a internal combustion engine is obviously significant relative to the weight of the car. Relative to the weight of the bus, it's a lot less in terms of additional impact on the road infrastructure, wear and tear and so on.
Okay. So just very quickly then, so no one's brought to your attention, Commissioner, that this is a potential risk. It's not on the TfL risk register, for example?
Not been brought to my attention, no, but I'm sure our operational teams will be keeping a close eye on it, yeah.
Okay, and you've not done any specific analysis to measure yet whether that's having an impact?
I'm personally not aware of any. It may well be that our team's looking at it, and if they are, then I'll write to the committee and confirm that, but I'm not aware of any.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Yeah, it'd probably be good to just follow that up in writing, just so we can have that pinned down. Just quickly picking up before I go to Assembly Member Prince. Commissioner, you said that the decisions on where to put protected cycle lanes were where volume and risk is greatest. Now, I can't lay my hands on it, but my impression was that the aim was in TfL roads to create a network in order to increase cycle journeys, and that actually there wasn't specific data of current or projected journeys by bike that were underpinning that. Obviously, we have safety risk data. Would you be able to confirm that in writing? Because, like I say, because that's not my impression of where the what was backing up the protected cycle lane network, certainly on TfL roads.
Will do.
Thanks. Assembly Member Prince.
I think Assembly Member Garrett's broadly covered the points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice coordination, accidentally. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, and good morning, both of you. So, Assembly Member Garrett's covered in great detail all the what you've described previously, or TfL has described previously, as reimagining London's bus network with all the different kinds of priority measures. But I'm wanting to think about this from the perspective of passengers and just what reimagining the bus network means for Londoners and what they get from their buses. And many of us around this horseshoe have experienced kind of emails and concerns raised by people living in particular parts of London where their bus network has changed. And it really made me think about the difference between the relationship of buses to where you live and the tube and a tube or train station to where you live. So if you live near a tube or train station, that station isn't going to move. It might get fewer services or whatever, but basically it retains the same relationship to your home and the same walking distance to get there to be able to access transport services. If you live in some parts of outer London where bus routes have changed, you can end up with a much, much longer walk to access a bus, and so your your whole relationship to the bus services has been shifted, because if you're older or disabled, it may actually be beyond you to walk the further distance that you're being asked to walk to access the bus that has now been moved a few streets along for a bus stop. And I just wonder what work you do with Londoners when you're making these changes to the bus routes, which I can see are kind of needed because you're trying to get the services evened out and make sure that you're optimising how the buses are being used. But are you really looking into the impacts on particular networks of local streets where actually services are going down, and that may have a particular impact on older and disabled residents?
Yeah, thank you, and hello to our visitors.
Shall I just welcome them as you've done?
Yeah.
Welcome, hello. It's the School Council and teachers from Keir Hardy School in Newham, I believe. Yep. Thank you very much. We're talking about buses, and this is the Deputy Mayor and the Commissioner for Transport for London, so we're asking them some deep questions about Transport for London today. It's lovely to have you here with us.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, whenever we make any changes, we go into full consultation and encourage anybody and everybody who has a view to respond to those consultations. I think there are 2 or 3 things. So in short answer, yes, we try and make sure we assess the impact across the board. We recognise, the bus, it is our most used mode in TfL. Over 5 million people a day use the bus network, and particularly in areas where there is limited or no rail services, it is the transport lifeline that people need. That's why, in particular, we want to try and do more services in outer London. We've seen since the pandemic that there's been more sort of outer London need for people to travel between boroughs and within boroughs, rather than how the bus network was originally set up, which was fundamentally to feed inner and central London. That's also why the Superloop, for example, is focused on feeding key transport hubs, hospitals, other key elements, and will continue to do so. The other thing, I forget the stat, but something like 85% of Londoners live within 400 metres of a bus stop. And if we make a change to the network, I know it's really difficult. I live in outer London myself, so there are certain bus routes that I tend to use. But I'd encourage people to think about how the bus network is exactly that. It's a network in the same way as the tube is. So if one route runs between point A and point B, it intersects with other routes along the way, and that creates the opportunity for people to use it as a network to get to elsewhere in the city, or to get to more accessible rail and tube services. We want to make sure that we reduce and minimise the impact for people need to make what they believe to be unnecessary interchanges. We need to make sure, particularly for people with accessibility needs or the elderly who need to get to, or anybody who needs to get to hospital appointments, that we try and minimise the impact on that. And also we want to make sure we have a service that is reliable and frequent. And we have to recognise that the cost of operating the bus network is continuing to grow significantly. We need to take action to minimise that and reduce that. We also want to reduce that impact by increasing ridership on the bus network, where there has been steady decline over the last few years. So part of the changes we're making is around encouraging people to use the network more, get them to think about it as a network rather than just as an individual line, But absolutely, we always try and ensure that we take account of the needs within the local area when we propose any changes or implement any changes.
I think one of the issues perhaps is that some of the people who are potentially most reliant on the bus are people who maybe are not particularly digitally savvy and maybe don't even, I know a lot of older people still don't use a smartphone. Many do, but there are many who also don't. And so the kind of complaints that I've had come through my inbox are about kind of lack of proper explanation at the bus stops of what the changes are, lack of current up-to-date maps that show where the new routes go and what the timetable is, and those are the kind of it's putting attention to those kind of changes that are making sure that all residents, and particularly those people who either can't afford a smartphone or don't have one, and particularly if there isn't a digital display board at the bus stop, which in many bus stops there isn't, just making sure that there's real thought given to that old-fashioned communication of signs, maps, and just good, clear, basic communication, and getting it out into local libraries, other local places, so that people can learn about those bus route changes and kind of really not find themselves feeling like they've lost service.
So I couldn't agree more. As far as I'm aware, we absolutely put that signage out at bus shelters and bus stops. I'll take the point away around putting it in the local community as part of consultation or as part of advance notice prior to any changes being made. And I'll come back and confirm what we do, and equally, if we don't, see what more we can do to do that. But in terms of timetables, maps, proposed route changes, they should all be displayed in advance of any changes being made. Obviously, easier to do in bus shelters, more difficult to do where it's just a bus stop, where it's primarily a timetable and a yellow notice. But I'll take that away to see what more we can do, particularly for those customers who, as you say, don't necessarily have the digital access that a lot of people do have.
And particularly because the impact of not having digital access, if you're standing at one of those stops that isn't even a bus shelter, you don't know if you missed the bus because it happened to come weirdly early or...
Yeah, so there absolutely should be that information available at every bus stop. So if that isn't, and you've got some very specific examples, please do let us know.
I can send
we'll
stuff
sort that
through.
out.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up the issue about bus services in Outer London. I mean, we had the big Inner London bus reconfiguration years ago, and the idea of that was to put more bus capacity into Outer London. And I agree with everything that Caroline has said about changes to bus routes. And my patch of Enfield and Haringey have had 3 quite large consultations very recently. So if I take, for example, the 259, 279 and 349, they're the routes that go down Tottenham High Road and up into Enfield Lock and way up there. You've recently consulted on almost exactly the same proposals you put forward 2 years ago that was resoundingly rejected by residents. And it looks like, on the face of it, this is about taking capacity out of those routes. And, for example, we will not now have direct access to King's Cross from my part of London. Why are you revisiting things so soon? I understand that in some of the other consultations there's been developments happening, so you need to look at bus capacity. But why revisit something that's already been rejected not so long ago?
So, as I said before, as part of our business plan, we do have too much capacity in inner and central London. Some of those are routes that just serve inner and central London. Some are obviously routes that come in from outer. And that's why I think it's important that we consider the bus network as that. It is a network. So this is consultation that we're doing across a number of routes. We haven't made any decisions yet. It may be on the back of receiving, if we get the same feedback again and we decide that actually it's not the right thing to do, we won't do it, or we might come up with an alternative solution. It's about making sure we have the right size and the right service levels across the city to meet the city's needs, and at the same time encouraging people to get back on the bus, because an interchange at a bus stop is pretty convenient, but we don't want to make that too much of an issue. But equally, we have to recognise we've got a hard financial impact as well. If we do nothing, our bus subsidy is going to rise hugely over the course of this business plan and become completely unaffordable. Now, we've got to tackle the cost and the performance, but we also want to make sure we have the opportunity to grow services elsewhere as well, and do that in the most affordable way. So I'm not familiar with the details of previous consultation, but I want to assure you we're taking this consultation seriously. We won't implement everything that we're consulting on, because otherwise that just, why would we consult? Because, we'd just be ignoring everybody's views. We need to take them all into consideration, and some we'll act on, some we might make some changes on, and some we might not implement. We're reviewing all the consultation responses we've had across all those routes, and we'll make a decision and let you all know accordingly. But I do need Londoners to recognise that in some cases we will potentially need to change some routes so that direct access to certain locations in inner or central London may no longer be part of the route network, but there'll be a very accessible and quick interchange option at somewhere on the route.
Okay, thank you. And Chair, if I can just relate to Outer London, but this also affects Inner London, can you just give us a quick update about your negotiations with government about devolution of the Great Northern Line? The franchise obviously comes to an end in 2-3 weeks, and as I understand it rolls into Great British Railways, but hopefully it's going to come back out to you.
So we very much hope so. So GTR, who are the operator of the whole Thameslink franchise, as you say, transition into the DfT operator. I think it's in May, or maybe March, I can't remember, but it's in the next few weeks. We continue to have positive engagement with the department around our request to devolve the Great Northern Inners, so as you rightly say, Moorgate and Old Street into Hertfordshire. We have made a strong case, we think, for bringing that in to be part of the London Overground network. We think we can increase the frequencies without impacting the East Coast Main Line services, which is obviously something that the department and Network Rail want to protect. And on the back of the Newtowns report, particularly with Cruise Hill, we think there's a real strong business case and value because of how we've demonstrated how the Overground has delivered real value and used underutilised rail services, grown patronage, enabled economic development and housing. So I'm hoping we'll get some confirmation in terms of next steps. There's a lot of work that's got to be done collectively between ourselves, GTR, stroke DFTO going forward, Network Rail, to make sure that it is feasible. But I say that the dialogue has been pretty encouraging so far.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I just want to follow up before I go to Assemblymember Desai on what Assemblymember McCartney said about previous changes to routes that had been proposed, I think in summer 2021, maybe 2022. Apologies, don't have them in front of me. All at the same time. I think lots of those, I don't have that in front of me, but I think lots of those have come back. And it strikes me that the reason they were rejected previously, or whether TFA rolled back on them, is because they were proposed all at the same time. Londoners were able to see that this was a wholesale reduction of the network being proposed in Inner London, and now it's happening in bits and pieces. Then it's just the general understanding of what is being proposed is not understood. But you say that the TfL have listened to the feedback, and let's see what the feedback's going to be. It's going to be exactly the same feedback. It's going to be literally exactly the same feedback. It just strikes me that TfL aren't engaging honestly with Londoners about exactly what's changing, if making lots of small changes, lots of route curtailments, lots of frequency reductions all across inner London. And while I accept the budgetary challenges, ultimately Londoners are going to decide what transport they want. And if they want their buses to operate in a certain way, is that not something that you should be listening to, rather than bringing back the same changes that clearly TfL are going, well, we've always wanted to do this, we're just going to ask you again in 3 years' time?
So I have to disagree with the comment around us being dishonest. I fundamentally take issue with that. That is absolutely not something that we do. We won't always agree, or we won't get everybody to agree with what we propose. My role is to make sure we provide a safe, reliable, affordable transport system for London. I don't think we've looked that there were elements done post-COVID because of the funding challenges and the requirements of the government at the time that the mayor and ourselves pushed back on in terms of that. But we are now, as part of our business plan, looking at how do we make sure we have a bus network that is fit for purpose for our city, that meets Londoners' needs, that is affordable, and that takes on the opportunity of how we can grow services elsewhere in London as well. So all I can sit here and assure you is we will take the consultation seriously. Some of that consultation may say exactly the same responses we had previously. We'll need to assess whether or not we can progress or not those changes. But what I will do is absolutely commit that we will be open and honest and transparent around whatever decisions we make and why we make them.
Okay. Deputy Mayor, on that issue, do you feel that Londoners are genuinely supportive of a raft of changes in inner London which are reducing their access to buses, curtailing routes and reducing frequency? Do you think inner Londoners overall understand that and are supportive of that?
The premise of your question is that there is a reduction in service and access to buses. So,
there is, though. Don't disagree with me on this. In inner London, it's absolutely explicit and has been for a number of years that TfL want to reduce it in London to expand it in outer London. That shouldn't be something that you disagree with, because that is actually what's happening.
I'm disagreeing with. I'm pointing out the premise that's about reducing access. Londoners would not support reducing access. What Londoners want is a bus network that turns up reliably, regularly, and that takes them to the places they need to get to. That's only really been possible since the Hopper Fair. The Hopper Fair provides a network where previously a bus route would have to take somebody from their point of origin to their place of destination, and if it didn't do that, it wasn't of much use. Being able to obviously change onto a different bus, to take advantage of the bigger network that we have particularly in outer London, where, for example, people are on average able to access the Superloop route with just one change from a bus route. That is about increasing access, increasing options. And sometimes where you have some corridors, for example, where there are 96 buses an hour, to name one famous example, if that route allocation were more spaced out, it can actually provide a better customer experience by providing more regular services to more destinations where people can change onto other parts of the network more easily. So I think the Hopper Fair has completely transformed the way in which it's possible to look at the bus network. And just to draw on Assembly Member Russell's earlier comments about identity and access to the network, it is absolutely true that, of course, the bus network is more flexible, of course, by its very nature than tube or rail. But that doesn't mean that people don't have a very strong sense of identity to their local routes that they become very familiar with and very attached to, which is why, if there are any changes, they have to improve the customer experience, and that change has to be adequately communicated and consulted on, which, of course, is what TfL are doing. But if you're asking me, would Londoners support a reduction in access to the bus network? No, of course not.
Okay. On to the Superloop. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. My question is to you, Commissioner. Commissioner, what plans are there for further Superloop routes beyond those already announced?
Thank you. So I'm really proud of the Superloop. It's something that we came up with in relatively short order and implemented, probably the quickest thing TfL has implemented in its 25-year history in terms of a new operational network. And it's delivering real benefits. We've seen huge increase in ridership on those routes. We've got 4 further routes that are planned or will be under consultation. SL12, Rainham to Gants Hill via Romford, hoping to introduce that later this year. SL13, Hendon to Ealing Broadway. There's some complexity involved in that, particularly because there's some significant tree works that would be required that we need to carefully consider if we wanted to operate double-deck services. SL14, Stratford to Chingford Hatch, aiming for spring next year, and SL15, which is Clapham Junction to Eltham, which should be later 2027. So 4 more routes that we're hoping to launch subject to consultation and, of course, operational and commercial contracts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, sure you can. So, Assemblymember McCartney, and then you're on the list. Sorry.
Can I ask, the beauty of the Superloop, and it's brilliant, and the logo is fantastic too, is that it provides a ring, and the new Superloops are further out in outer London. Do you envisage it being a ring as well, where one can just go around? Because I'm hopefully looking forward to one that's going to connect outer Enfield with Barnet.
So we've got a ring at the moment across the whole of London. There's all sorts of ideas and proposals being considered. We need to make sure that there really is a demand there, and clearly we will also look at, as we just discussed, if we think there are additions that can be made or other connections that can be added, the team will always look at that if we think it makes sense, and we'll do the consultation. I haven't got any specifics that I'm aware of in terms of that, but certainly I have seen in some very draft informal plans around, do you end up with a double loop or that sort of thing, but there's nothing actively being worked on that at the moment.
Barnet, Enfield Town, Chingford. That's what I need.
I will remind the team.
We may have entered the transport request section of the meeting. Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Deputy Mayor, if I may start with you'll know from previous meetings we've had about the 320 bus in my constituency that serves some of the most rural parts of Bromley. The 320 is regularly curtailed early due to congestion on the route. Along with one of the Biggin Hill councillors, Sophie Dunbar, I've been running a survey about the frequency of the 320 and what to do about it. So far, 80% of respondents to the survey have rated bus services in Biggin Hill as unreliable. 40% voted the 320 the most unreliable even of these services. 83% said they had been left stranded in Keston, which, for those that don't know the area, is a village. It's not somewhere that rungs into something. It's surrounded by fields. 57% of respondents said this happens on a weekly basis. 28% says it happens at least a couple of times a month. The most popular of the solutions put forward, or possible solutions for me to bring here, were a new Superloop route to provide the fasting, reliable connection to other parts of the borough, replacing the 320 with a Superloop service itself so that it can skip some of the congested areas, or additional shuttle bus services between some of the more rural areas. So in the event of getting stranded, you don't have to wait for another bus to come out the same congestion you've just been caught in. Will you take those suggestions away and look into them?
Absolutely. Look, I think you've just illustrated perfectly the rationale for the Superloop, which is that we have had an historic model where buses serve inner and central London, getting people to and from the centre of the city. Clearly, there is a lot of demand, as we can see from the figures that the Commissioner has given in terms of the uptake of ridership on the Superloop. There is a lot of demand for travel around outer London by public transport. Perhaps that's previously only been available to those who have access to a private car, making it an option for people to travel by public transport is very important. So look, absolutely take away the 320 very clear feedback that you've given, and the purpose, as you say, of the Superloop is to meet what is a clear demand there, and I think you've just illustrated what demand looks like, and when people feel their bus service isn't delivering the strength of opinion that is attached to that. So I'll definitely take that away.
Thank you very much. Now, building on that, when the Superloop was announced, it was intended to improve connectivity in areas which are being historically more reliant on cars. But the routes announced so far connect up pretty well-served town centres already. They don't, leads on what Assembly Member McCartney was just saying, a lot of the more rural aspects of outer London, which are the most dependent on cars, are still underserved by bus services. So how does so will it builds on that question about what is going to be done to look at this hole in the logic of the Superloop?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a hole in the logic in the sense that obviously where you have denser areas, they're going to need denser bus services, which of course, when we talk about inner and outer London, there is a tendency, I think, to think of outer London as not having dense areas, which of course couldn't be further from the truth. There are, as we know, a series of villages and towns that make up this great city, and some of those villages and towns are extremely dense and more representative of city centres perhaps elsewhere in the country. So it's important that we have a dense network as well in outer London. It will often be the case that more rural areas will have a less dense bus network as a result. But the key here is that the services that cover rural areas, and but I should remind people that 97% of Londoners live within 400 metres of a bus stop. That's across Greater London, including some of the more sparsely populated areas. What is important is that the bus routes that serve those areas are frequent enough and reliable enough to connect to the Superloops, to connect to the transport nodes, and to connect to those denser town centre networks that we want to create in outer London. And that's the challenge, if you like. And that's why rebuilding the network is so important, and making sure that we deliver on that demand and that need. Communicating that is often the challenge, but that's really the vision.
Thank you for that. Now, in the answer earlier, the Commissioner mentioned some of the incoming Superloops that are currently either being consulted on or are being planned. A lot of these the original Superloop announced was all additional services. A lot of the ones that are being announced post-implementation of the first Superloop, when you read the detail in the consultation, they are replacing an existing service rather than being in addition to that. So could you just touch upon what the impact on capacity in some of these places will be by having these as replacement services, not additional services?
So there's a mix of services which have been, or some two were converted from the old X routes, and as you say, some are brand new and some are looking at how we improve the journey time on certain routes. I don't have the data to hand, but I'd be very happy to write to the committee with explaining where there has been, what the impact or not has been. Generally, though, even where you put a replacement in, we still have a bus corridor with other services, and overall the ridership has grown. But I'll very happily write to the committee with some detail on that.
Thank you very much. And the Chair will be pleased. Final question on this will be the decision to use the Superloop as being an express service, using it to replace existing routes, so having fewer stops along those roads. Is the rationale for that driven by increasing bus speeds?
No, the rationale is driven by where we think the majority of people using the route want to get to. And therefore it's providing the capacity for those who are taking shorter journeys, but at the same time providing a reduced journey time for those who are taking longer journeys.
Thanks. Bus questions always welcome. And perhaps we need to be looking at breaking down bus journey times and speeds between the Superloop and the rest of buses to pick up that point. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Well, I did have one or two questions written down. I've now got even more. So If we look at the Superloop that you refer to, one of the new proposed routes that ends up in Romford, I thought that the idea of the Superloop was that it was to join up the ends of the spoke, not to add to it. I mean, I do know that we've been very badly served by the Superloop in Havering. I know that the Member of Parliament is very keen to take Havering out of London, but looks like TfL already done it. What people want is a bus that goes from Rainham to Upminster and then goes around the edge of the spoke, not a bus service that goes to Romford, which has been a hub since Roman times for the entire area. People don't want to go into Romford to go to Upminster or into Romford to go to Rainham, which they can currently do. They want a bus that takes them from Upminster, Rainham, Upminster, Harold Wood. So you deal with the stations that are on the outer spoke. And I did put forward a proposal which was rejected, but that is the sort of thing that I expected the Superloop to do, to join up the ends of the spoke, not just to add to the congestion that's already in the hub. I'll leave that. I don't know if you want to answer that one first.
So the Superloop's been designed to try and connect the whole of Outer London, as you know. To say it's specifically connecting the spokes wasn't a particular objective. We clearly want to make sure that it is serving the best needs. So I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the geography or the area. So I will ask the team again to look at that, Assembly Member Prince, and see if there's more we can do. The principle, though, that I am pushing for is how we improve Outer London connectivity. Superloop isn't the only thing that we're focused on in terms of improving Outer London bus services. To Assemblymember Turrell's point, is how can we provide more bus services that are reliable within boroughs and between boroughs. Some of those will be express Superloop services, some of them will be new or enhanced local bus services, and some of those will be in connection to new developments and that sort of thing. So very happy to take that away.
Well, I really, I kind of agree with you. I think the Superloop should be about connectivity rather than capacity. And moving on then to the another one of my bugbears, which is the SL4. In the first part of its journey, it has about 4 stops within within a half a mile, most certainly. And then it goes on then it gets to Kidbrooke and goes on a 5-mile meander without stopping once, which is quite absurd. It goes past North Woolwich, doesn't stop there. And you'd think if you lived in Kidbrooke, you'd want to go to North Woolwich, because you would. And then it flies past City Hall, and who wouldn't want to stop at City Hall? It's only got to stop on the bridge and you're there, and ends up in Canning Town. So it goes all the way from Kidbrooke to Canning Town without stopping once. It's quite absurd. And I get I support the principle of Superloop, but I thought the idea is that it stopped infrequently, not stopped frequently and then didn't stop. So just you might want to have a think about that one. You don't need to answer that. I wouldn't expect you to know the detail of the route. But could I ask you about the SCS, which isn't a Superloop, but it's a supercycle service, really, that sits outside here. I agree with the service. I agree that it's a good thing that we enable push bike people to be able to get through the Silvertown Tunnel, which is an improvement. Not enough lanes, but an improvement. Don't like the fact that EastEnders have to pay to go over the river, but that's another argument. But there's only ever one, if you're lucky, maybe 2 people ever use that service. Now, I did raise this with the Mayor some time ago. Would it not make sense, one, to maybe allow wheelchair users or other impaired people to use that service, but more importantly, why not let foot passengers use it as well? I mean, it's a great service to go from here to North Woolwich. And you could, if you wanted to, you could limit the number of foot passengers to 10 or 20, but it just seems to me that's an absolutely wasted resource. If you were to look at the finances of it on and the usage by push bikers, you can't justify the service. You just cannot justify it, because they can jump on the aerial thing outside if they want to. So why can we not do the sensible thing and allow people to ride on the bus that is serving a personally good use?
So thank you for recognising the benefits of the Silvertown Tunnel, which has had a huge impact and benefit. The cycle shuttle was a requirement of the proposals around what we do when we open the tunnel. There'll be a 1-year-on report being published in the early summer, and one of the things that I have asked the team to look at is what more can we do? Is there an option for the cycle shuttle to again further ensure people are aware it exists, but B, can it be used for other passengers? We need to make sure, clearly there's a lot of infrastructure on the north side for people to get to the bus stop. We would need to make sure there's the appropriate safe infrastructure available on the south side as well. So that's one of the things that I suspect, without preempting the report, may well be something that's being considered going forward.
It seems strange that the infrastructure's safe for cyclists but not for pedestrians.
Well, cyclists don't ride on pavements, and I'm not familiar.
You better tell them that then.
Well, they shouldn't do, and we would need to make sure there's sufficient infrastructure. I'm not familiar enough with the south side of the tunnel to know
It
what
could stop
pedestrian-
by the Millennium Park, though, couldn't it? Which is only a little further away.
And that's why I said as part of
people want to go there.
1-year-on report, I've asked the team to look at whether or not there's some other options.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to take a comfort break now, if that's all right, and we'll come back with some questions about bus driver health and safety. So if we can come back for 11:40.